At the southwestern edge of the world's greatest ocean sit two large islands. Filled with stunning natural beauty, these lands were the last of significant size to be settled by humans anywhere. Today, these two islands are a fusion of two peoples from very different worlds, which together form a unique character among the club of global nations. This is a country of sheep and rugby, the haka and the outdoors. This is a land of otherworldly television and cinema. This is the most remote of all developed nations. This is New Zealand. New Zealand is the most remote developed nation in the world, sitting on the southwestern edge of the Pacific Ocean. Consisting of two large islands and 700 smaller ones, New Zealand is famed for its wild, natural scenic beauty. First discovered and colonised by Polynesians in the 13th century, who later became the Maori, it was later settled by the British from the early 19th century, and today these cultures are fused to create the unique New Zealand of today. In part 1 of this two-part presentation, I looked at New Zealand's history up to the present. In this episode, I will look at its physical and human geography, its national organisation and state structure and symbols, and lastly, its economy and culture. If you like these country summary videos, then please be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. The name of the country dates back to its first European discovery by Dutch explorers in the 17th century, who named it after the province of Zeeland in the Netherlands, originally in the Latin form of Nova Zelandia, later anglicised to New Zealand. The Maori call these islands Aotearoa, which means the land of the long white cloud, and refers to a myth of the wife of Kupe, the Polynesian explorer who discovered the islands, supposedly seeing a type of long white cloud near the horizon that would indicate to the expert Polynesian navigators that land was beneath them. Aotearoa, by extension, refers to the whole country, being short for Aotearoa me Te Waipunamu, North and South Island. Te Waipunamu is the official name of the South Island in the Maori language and means the green stone waters, while the official Maori name for the North Island is Te Ika au Maui, the giant fish of the mythical hero Maui. Current polling on the issue of the country's name is to stick with the status quo, with just over half of respondents in a recent survey saying they prefer New Zealand only. But the block of respondents who wanted Aotearoa somewhere in the name, be it solely or a combination of Aotearoa New Zealand, was sizeable. With the current trend of former colonial territories reverting to native names throughout the world, it seems likely that at some point in the future, Aotearoa will be weaved into the name of this country. New Zealand sits on the southwestern edge of the Pacific Ocean. Being just west of the international dateline, it has a time zone of plus 12 hours UTC, in a southerly latitude range of 34 to 47 degrees south, and so is quite literally on the opposite side of the world to the European mother country of Great Britain at plus 0 UTC and approximately 52 degrees north. It is among the first of nations to celebrate the bringing in of the new year. There are two main islands, which appear on maps as North and South Island, but which are referred to by locals using the definite article, that is, the North Island and the South Island. These are separated by the Cook Strait, just 22 kilometers at its narrowest point. There are 700 smaller islands, the largest being Stewart Island off the south coast of South Island. New Zealand also has a free association with the Cook Islands and Niue. These territories maintain their own internal affairs, but New Zealand is responsible for the defence and foreign affairs. With a total land area of 270,000 square kilometres, it is slightly smaller than the British Isles. South Island is the larger of the two, with North Island a third smaller. The road journey of just over 1,000 kilometres from the northern to southern tip of North Island would take around 13 hours. The equivalent journey on South Island is about 10% shorter. The topography of New Zealand is determined by its location on the boundary of the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates. South Island is more mountainous than North Island, with the Southern Alps rising up to 3,700 metres at their highest point at Mount Cook. It is here that we find arguably the most stunning landscapes, as these mountains descend into the Tasman Sea in the west in the form of deep fjords carved out from glaciers during the last ice age. Most of the country's volcanoes are found in the central part of North Island, around Lake Taupo. This large lake is actually the cratered remains of the world's last supervolcano eruption, occurring about 27,000 years ago, in which over 1,000 square kilometers of material was ejected. Much more recently, in December of 2019, in the Bay of Plenty to the north of Taupo, a small eruption of White Island tragically killed 22 tourists who were visiting at that time. Earthquakes are also a part of living on this plate boundary. The most recent devastating reminder of this was in February of 2011, when a magnitude 6.2 earthquake occurred underneath the country's second largest city, Christchurch. 185 people lost their lives and thousands were injured. Over 10,000 homes needed to be demolished, due mainly to the collapse of foundations in the liquefaction of the soil in the coastal flats upon which the city was built. This was the worst of a series of quakes to batter the region in 2010 and 2011. The total cost of rebuilding is estimated to have been around 40 billion New Zealand dollars, making it the costliest natural disaster in the country's history. New Zealand has an especially mild temperate climate, being dominated by the Köppen oceanic climate of cool winters and warm summers. In general, this oceanic climate has more mild winters than the classic oceanic climate of northwest Europe. North Island, being closer to the equator, has a particularly mild climate, but the presence of the surrounding cool oceans and the almost ever-present westerly winds prevent summers from becoming hot and truly subtropical. On South Island, these westerlies dump their moist air upon the steep slopes of the Southern Alps, leading to very high rainfall figures that produce one of the few temperate rainforests found in the world. In contrast, the eastern parts of South Island border on semi-arid conditions, since so little rain is left once these westerlies have passed over the mountains. Here, in this drier region, we find in the natural biome a form of grassland instead of forest. On North Island, the patterns of rainfall are less extreme, and the natural biomes here are a mix of forests and grasslands. In general, the day-to-day weather in New Zealand is notoriously changeable, with dramatic shifts in weather sometimes as much as 4 times in one day. This is due to the country being surrounded on all sides by ocean waters that regularly brew up storms that descend upon the land. Deforestation began with the arrival of the Maori 7 centuries ago, with about half of the island's forests lost prior to the arrival of the British. Most of the remaining forests since then have been replaced by farmland, from which agriculture dominated the economy for over a century until 50 years ago. An exception to this land use is the rugged west coast of South Island and its temperate rainforest, which, due to its very high rainfall as well as steep topography, has remained unsuitable for cultivation. With New Zealand so isolated from other landmasses for so many millions of years, animal species have evolved into very different forms compared to the rest of the world. Remarkably, no land mammal species existed in New Zealand prior to the arrival of humans, and so, lacking such predators, birds were free to develop into giant forms, with one of the now extinct moa bird species being the tallest bird to have existed, reaching up to 3.6 meters in height. This lack of mammalian predators prior to the arrival of humans saw New Zealand having perhaps the greatest biodiversity of ground nesting birds in the world. But the introduction of rats, stoats and feral cats, particularly by the Europeans, had a devastating impact upon this bird population, whose ground-based nests were easy pickings for egg and chick hunters. The most famous family of such ground-nesting birds, however, has survived. The kiwi is a distant relation to ostriches and emus and has become a national symbol, with the demonym Kiwi being applied to people from New Zealand. Kiwis, of the human form, currently total just over 5 million, making New Zealand the 121st most populous nation in the world. With a relatively small population over a sizable land area, New Zealand's population is less than 10% of Britain's, but of a similar size in area, it is one of the least densely populated countries in the world. About 3/4 of the population live on North Island, with the metropolitan area of Auckland accounting for 1/3 of all people in the country at around 1.7 million. The next largest city is Christchurch on South Island at about 500,000 in the metro area, with the capital city, Wellington, third at around 400,000. About 70% of Kiwis are of European origin and 16% Maori. In recent decades, significant immigration from China and India has contributed to about 12% of the population being considered Asian. People from Pacific islands other than New Zealand account for about 8% of the population. The language spoken throughout the country is English, due to the country once being a colony of the British Empire. The language is spoken with a Kiwi accent, similar to Australian, and while the difference is easily distinguishable between Aussies and Kiwis themselves, as a Pommy outsider, I find it hard to split the two. Maori is the second language of the country and is part of the Polynesian family of languages, with Hawaiian, Tongan, and Samoan being notable others. Polynesian is in turn a part of the Austronesian supergroup of languages that also includes Indonesian, Malay, and the various Filipino languages. New Zealand is one of the most secular countries in the world, with almost half of 2018 census respondents saying they had no religion. About 37% identified as Christian. For administrative purposes, the country is divided into 11 regional councils that deal with regional environmental and resource issues, and 67 territorial authorities that deal with the traditional local authority matters such as roads, water, and planning. As New Zealand is a part of the British Commonwealth, the head of state is the king residing in Britain, but this, like in all Commonwealth countries, is a ceremonial role, with true power invested in Parliament, which in New Zealand's case is the House of Representatives, which sits in the capital of Wellington. Members of Parliament are elected by a system of proportional representation for 3-year terms, among the shortest in the world. Executive power is granted to a cabinet of ministers chosen by a prime minister, who is the leader of the political party with the most seats in Parliament. The two parties that have dominated New Zealand politics for almost a century are the centre-right National Party and their centre-left rivals, the Labour Party. In the Cato Institute's latest Human Freedom Index, which takes into account the health crisis of 2020, New Zealand scores extremely high, ranked overall number 2 in the world, due to its combination of economic and personal freedom. Only the size of government acts as a blot on this picture. The flag of New Zealand is based upon the old British Navy blue ensign, as is common with many other Commonwealth countries. In New Zealand's case, the ensign is augmented with the 4 brightest stars of the Southern Cross constellation, visible throughout the year at these southerly latitudes. First used by colony ships in 1869, it has been in official use as the national flag since 1902. The flag has great similarity with that of Australia's, but with the stars being red instead of white, and missing the 5th star of the Southern Cross and the large Commonwealth star bottom left. The coat of arms is filled with meaning relating to the country's history and makeup. The 2 supporters of the central shield are a European woman and a Maori chieftain, to symbolise the dual primary ethnicities of the country. St. Edward's crown sits atop the shield to indicate that the British king is head of state. The shield is split into 3 columns representing the North and South Islands and the Cook Strait between. The Southern Cross, a wheat sheaf, a fleece and crossed hammers represent the southern aspect of the islands, its agricultural and mining activity respectively, while the 3 ancient galleys in the middle represent the sea trade that has so dominated the country past and present. Lastly, the name of the country is presented on a scroll supported by fronds of the ferns that are so commonly found within the country's natural habitat. With a GDP of $252 billion, New Zealand's economy is the 52nd largest in the world in nominal terms. Where once this economy was dominated by agriculture, following a restructuring in the 1970s and 80s, services now form over 2/3 of wealth creation in the country. New Zealand nonetheless is still a net exporter, with agriculture dominating in the form of milk, meat and butter, but the agriculture and extraction industries account for less than 10% of the country's GDP overall. Manufacturing accounts for around 12%. Since a certain trilogy of films were released 2 decades ago, New Zealand tourism has boomed despite the country's remoteness and is now the leading source of foreign currency in the country and a significant part of the service economy. Financial services are another key service industry. The local currency is the New Zealand dollar, which at the time of this video was trading at 1.61 to the US dollar. The culture of New Zealand is dominated by the association with the majority of its population's ancestors of the British Isles. In sport, this is most keenly observed, with cricket and yachting, for instance, being notable continuations of the pursuits of the British. But it is in rugby, another British import, where the Kiwis went on to better their forefathers, and the New Zealand All Blacks team are considered to be the greatest and most feared national team in the sport. A part of the most feared aspect comes from the team performing a haka just before kickoff in each game. The haka is a traditional Maori dance performed in a number of different forms depending upon purpose. In addition to the chanting and synchronized dance, it is notable for the fearsome expressions made by the performers, especially those hakas performed before going into battle, or indeed a game of rugby, intended to put fear into the enemy or opposition. In my view, however, the greatest contribution to global culture from New Zealand has been the recent growth of the genre TV and movie industry. Many popular TV shows, especially in speculative fiction, have been filmed here, with local talent emerging in the form of a parade of actors and actresses that have gone on to international recognition, as well as world-class special effects production. The greatest of these projects is, of course, Peter Jackson's adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings classic fantasy trilogy. Filmed almost entirely within New Zealand, the stunning scenery of the land itself brought to life on screen Tolkien's vision of Middle-earth in a way that perhaps no other land could. And what about famous and notable Kiwis? Well, to conclude this presentation, I present to you my own personal list. And that's New Zealand. I hope you enjoyed this presentation of its history, geography, economy and culture. Please like and share this video if you enjoyed it or found it useful, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments, especially if you're from this country and if I missed out anything that you feel is important. If you haven't already done so, then please click the subscribe button and the bell notification icon so you don't miss future episodes. You can also support future development of this channel by becoming a member. Just click the join button below the video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.